And action. Hey everyone, it's Dr. Rick. Happy holidays. Rico had a question about fasting. Well, there's a couple questions. I'll try to put them all in. Fasting, dieting, sleeping, and medicines. So if this is the first time you're finding me though, don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below and the alert button to find out when I do new videos. So fasting. This is also this is a common question actually. It's Sunday, and we're switching over to a new medical records with Advocate, and I'm practicing. So, man, it's cold outside, and I didn't feel like going hiking, and I'm too sore to exercise from yesterday, and I happen to be fasting, so I thought I'd kill some time instead of hanging out in the kitchen and doing my work at home. I come here, where it's a lot easier to stay away from the cupboard and the fridge. So, fasting. So, I did a previous video, I'll see if I can put it here, about a couple of different pointers on different types of fast. I think that if you think about it, because fasting and relating it to people, actually dieting for a lot of folks is so difficult, because we insidiously have been brought up over about 2 to 4 decades on eating patterns, and we have more and more bad eating patterns and bad food introduced into our lifestyle slowly that you don't even recognize it. Driving here, I did do a video before, but driving from my house to here, I think I passed about 11 to 16, there's new places now, 11 to 16 fast food opportunities. So that's not a big deal when I'm driving to work, but when I'm driving home, if I'm hungry at night and I haven't prepped myself or given myself anything in the gut, I can easily pull over and just drive through. Pay, what, $5 to $10, drive through, eat on my way home, be ravenous in the car, and then be guilty when I get home, or have diarrhea or a lot of bloating and farting the next day because of my bad decision. So I detract. The bottom line is that nutrition, in the first treatment of any medical disease, I think with most of them that exist in America, nutrition is the first thing that we should be doing, using food as medicine, or at least taking away the crappy food that caused the medical disease in the first place. So fasting, how can we utilize fasting? Well, Occam's razor says the answer is the easiest solution. So the easiest solution to fixing a medical disease would be fix the diet. Now, the easiest way to fix the diet might just be truncating a diet. If you take, like, in a 24-hour time period from 0 hour to 24, and you have your diet that you manifest or you take in, and you note, and it's very important in a diet diary to actually note down what you're doing. You'd be surprised when I have patients that I ask, I want you to jot down a 2-week diet diary and bring it into the next visit. My registered dietitians will say, well, I don't need 2 weeks, I just need 3 days. But at least as far as they're trying to assess your usual intake. But I think 2 weeks is number one. It goes usually past 2 weekends, and weekend is usually when we binge. It also makes you accountable to jot down stuff on a regular basis. Most of us are so mindless when we eat, you don't realize the snacks that you're having or how often you're putting something in your mouth. We are not supposed to be grazing, and that is a concept of it's a type of eating where you feed yourself a little volume every couple hours, and for some people it does work. But I don't think the human anatomy is built for that. I think we're built for eat, take a break, eat, take a break, eat, go to sleep. Well, not exactly go to sleep right after eating, but I think we're allowed to eat 3 meals a day. Maybe a snack. But we find, I think, in society that we go too often. So if you can take that 24-hour window and shrink it down, and even in animal studies, they've done studies where they take a crappy diet, standard American diet, and they usually will take it for 24 hours and feed the animal the standard American diet. And then they'll take that same standard American diet and compress it to about a 10 to 12 hour window. Same diet, same volume, and they find that if they give a different set of animals to experiment and compare to the 24-hour animals that were fed, the same crappy diet in a truncated amount of time will actually cause less damage to the animal. So I'm going to repeat that. In animal studies, if you take a 24-hour diet and you compress it to a short amount of time, 10 to 12 hours, that animal that you compressed the diet window, the feeding window, into 10 or 12 hours, with the same diet would live longer with less disease than the one that just eats all the time. So there is some value to figuring out timing with regards to food. And that's where fasting is important. That's where the word breakfast comes from, break fast. So in theory, we're supposed to be fasting on a regular basis. Now, the question is, do you fast like for religion, where you don't eat anything for a couple of days straight, just water? Do you fast where you don't eat anything or don't eat any certain foods? There's different ways to do it, but the bottom line, again, Occam's razor, the bottom line with making this thing easy is, if we just make you accountable to a little bit of a window, it might have the body, the digestive system, the sleep system, click a little bit better and work a little bit more efficiently than before. Now, I'd always want you, if you do compress your window into 10 to 12 hours, I do 10, it would be important to not just do that animal study where you're eating crappy food, but again, if you're not sure what to do as far as calories, carbohydrates, macronutrients, proportions of proteins to fats or fats to carbohydrates, or micronutrients or fiber, you don't have to worry about that. That does take a lot of education and training to think in those terms. It puts food into a science basis, and it helps to break it down into measurements. And if you break it down to measurements, it's sometimes more accountable and easier to keep tally of your measurements. Now, that takes the love and the enjoyment of food, the connoisseur part of food out of the equation. It just makes it more scientific, which is okay for a short time. I think a lot of men identify with that because I hear a lot of guys saying, "I just tell me what to eat and I'll do it," which never really works. Because even if I robotically say, "I want you to eat 1,200 calories a day and keep it like that, I'll see you in 4 months after our next blood test." Well, there's other things. It's not sustainable because there's other things and priorities in life, and people get bored of that stuff. And they also get bored of not being able to go out or enjoy the weekend, because in the weekend usually we ramp up our ingestion of food and or beverage, and that throws off the diet if it's mechanical. So I want to empower patients to kind of be accountable, or at least be mindful of what they're doing with stuffing their faces and what is going in. As I mentioned in the beginning of this, when I go home, if I was to stop off at a fast food place or eat chips, I love chips, I love popcorn. I can finish off a large popcorn from Century Theater in Stratford Square Mall within one movie. So a movie is like an hour and a half, 2 hours. I can finish off that large popcorn, and that's not healthy. And I will be excited because it reminds me of going out to the movies with mom and dad when I was a kid. But I usually think after I leave, wow, this thing was empty. This thing is empty. I finished this off. Oh, shoot, I have to pay for it. And so I always have to pay penance after that. So anyway, so you can actually, if you feel guilty, or if you think you're going to be feeling guilty, then stop, pause for a second, and maybe you can withdraw from that bad decision. So that's mindfulness versus mindless eating. So fasting makes you accountable. And if you're not really well versed with reading or breaking down macronutrients, and by the way, Weight Watchers, the app, was really good, but you have to join Weight Watchers to get the app. I have people who do the Weight Watchers app and make the meetings. I also have patients that have just carried the Weight Watchers app, and I think it makes you accountable. It helps you with traveling. But regardless, if you're not good with measuring and keeping a tally, then one option is just keep a tally on your watch. If you pick that 10-hour window, the studies have been 10, and I think that's helpful. I see some high-intensity interval trainers, some CrossFit guys and gals, try to break it down to 8 hours of eating and 16 hours of fast. That's tight, especially that's good for the millennial exerciser, but for some of my middle-aged folks or my late baby boomers, they're on a lot of medicines, and some medicines you can't necessarily take without food. And sometimes those medicines are broken down into 12-hour windows. So if you're taking your early morning medicines at 6, and you have to take your late evening medicines at like 7 to 9, you have to have food, so you have to break your fast. And sometimes that's a deal breaker, which was a good question that Rico brought up last night because of problems with going to sleep. Maybe there's a side effect from the medicines, or maybe it's a side effect from the eating. So the easy question is, if it's eating, again, if you're not going to do any measurements, just pick the hours of eating. So I usually pick from, so I start to eat at about 9 or 10, and I also start to drink at about 9 or 10. That means water is the only thing I can have. So drinking or stimulation of the gastric juices also starts with taking pills, taking medicines, certain medicines, taking vitamins, taking coffee, taking tea. And it's tough, but I had to push my tea back a little bit, a couple hours, but it's working out okay. So I'm doing that in addition to being a vegan. However, I go from that time until usually about 7 p.m. I have to cut it. And that's, to me, a 10-hour fast. Doable. We'll see if it helps out in the long run. I'm going to get some blood tests to see a before and after kind of picture. However, for Rico, if we're going to try to nudge this sleep into a better circadian rhythm, or just work on a 10-hour fasting diet, the problem would be, when do we take our medicines? And I really think the medicines could be the problem of persistent insomnia issues. So I'd say that's when we play around with the dose, even though it's supposed to be a 12-hour dose. You take your medicines in the morning, and maybe you bring to an earlier point in time the evening medicines, maybe 6 a.m. And then 4 p.m. as far as the medicines. It might be a little early, but if we play around with the dosing just to make sure, I think in the long run it's not going to matter. In the short run, you might get more responsiveness from your pills, but maybe that'll be a good thing. And usually what happens with, again, fasting is you lose weight. When you become, say, 5% less on the weight, body mass index, waistline to waist to hip ratio, usually you don't need as much medicine. So this is a positive. So again, the food and the food manipulation as far as timing does take a little bit of time before you'll notice effects. But a lot of these guys that you see on YouTube, these Joe Bro guys or Bro Science guys, that's what's so cool is if you have enough money and you have enough energy, you can actually do your own experiment and come out with results. Now, that's not that reproducible, but it's kind of cool to see when people flip up their blood test results after experimenting with different nutrition plans. But anyway, fasting. So I would say if you don't want to do those measurements and you want to try something real easy, Occam's razor says, just compress your window. Now, if you're diabetic, then usually the body's cells, whether it's muscle, cardiac, heart, neurological, bone, muscle cells in particular are very sensitive to insulin in the morning after a good night's sleep. If you're not having a good night's sleep, that's okay. Still, the cells are more responsive to insulin in the morning. So theoretically, for the guys that are diabetics, you might have to have your meals start at 6 a.m. And you might want to load up the majority of your calories in the morning. Now, it's going to be a little different because if you have a family and you want to eat together in the evening, it's going to be tough. But again, if you load up if you start your fasting hours at 6 a.m., then the sugars won't have as much of an effect if you take in sugars, and you should be watching your sugar and your high fructose corn syrup. I just eliminate that altogether. When I say sugars, I actually mean carbohydrates. When you have a carbohydrate-loaded meal, you have it in the morning, hopefully it's a healthy meal with a good glycemic load number, then your cells will suck that in with very little insulin. And so without going into the details of the glycemic load or glycemic index, when you eat something, the body breaks it down into the basic building blocks: proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. And if it's healthy stuff that you eat, it's easier to break that stuff down. And when there's a majority of the 3 components in the carbohydrate realm, your pancreas has to produce insulin. It gets triggered depending on what's the dominant component of your meal. And if it's mostly carbohydrates, the pancreas says, "Ooh, I'm going to make some insulin to bind with the carbohydrates and get the carbohydrates and insulin, that complex, out of the bloodstream into the cell." So if you're more sensitive to insulin in the morning, then it's easier for that complex, carbohydrate and insulin, to get out of the bloodstream right into the cell, where it's supposed to be utilized as energy. If you are doing that size of a meal or eating late at night, theoretically, nighttime is not a good time to eat, especially as you're getting close to bedtime, because as melatonin begins to be secreted, melatonin is the hormone that at darkness gets triggered to be secreted from the pineal gland in the brain. When you have a lot of melatonin, the brain starts to slow down. And when it slows down, it goes to sleep and dreams. And some people need to spray melatonin under the tongue or take melatonin pills at night to induce that high level of melatonin so that the brain will feel it's time to sleep. Now, here's the thing. So I'm not getting off track as far as the sleep cycle, but melatonin at night is said and thought to decrease the responsiveness of insulin. So insulin and melatonin work opposite ways. Higher melatonin, less insulin responsiveness. So you don't want to be eating food at night, because theoretically, if you don't have as much responsiveness to insulin from the cell, it will ignore the carbohydrate insulin complex, and the cells will not let any insulin in, or any insulin / carbohydrate in. That means you'll have all this carbohydrate insulin component just floating around the bloodstream for a high amount of a high level of irritation, and it might even stay that way high till the morning. So if you have high sugars in the morning, it could be because you're eating too late at night. It probably is because your cells are just insulin resistant, as most diabetic type 2s are. But there is a play here, and if you eat a little earlier, again, if you start at 6 and you end at 4 p.m., you, number one, don't have as much time to eat, which in theory, I mean, you could take the same volume. Again, the animal studies say take the same volume, compress it. I don't think you want to take that much volume in a 10-hour window, and you'll find that just to be accountable to that, you'll cut out a lot of volume anyway, because it's hard to eat all that crap, or it's hard to eat that much volume in a shorter amount of time. So number one, you cut back volume. What happens when you cut back volume? Theoretically, you will lose weight. Number two, you will be conscious of what you will be taking with that food. So in the morning, most of us take we take coffee. At night, some people take alcohol. So if you pick your poison, say, take your 10-hour window and start at 6, end at 4, you're not going to be imbibing in alcohol, your nightcap, which cuts back on about 300 calories. I know I told you Occam's razor said don't have to measure anything, but that means you'll be stopping. By default, you won't be taking advantage of alcohol, which is kind of cool. So you're decreasing total volume. You're also decreasing the challenge and the temptation to take in those things with 0 calories or eat late at night. So you win in a couple different fields. So decreasing volume, picking your time of eat. Now, I mentioned something about family earlier, and family togetherness and holding hands, you don't have to pray or all that stuff, but there is something of love and serotonin and oxytocin that's secreted, all the love hormones, those repair hormones, secreted when you eat with your family, if it's a good family, without that much dysfunction. We all have dysfunction, but if you eat with a family, if you eat together, if you eat and are happy, then you digest properly. So if you have a family with young kids, you might want to wait and move your window to end at about 6 to 7 p.m. when everybody's together, both working parents are home, the kids are about finished with their homework and getting ready for bed, but you can have the union or the group meeting in the evening. But if you do that at 6 to 7 p.m., that means you're going to have to start eating a little later, because you're moving your window from early morning to evening. You have to eat a little later in the afternoon or more late morning. So that's kind of what I do. I start at about 9-ish or 10-ish, and I end at about 7-ish. So that seems to work out for me. That's, again, 10 hours. If you can be more athletic or be more challenging to your physiology and want to see faster results, you might want to squeeze that into an 8-hour window. I just find that's very hard for a parent and somebody that's on medications. So, because again, that window of fasting also includes anything you're drinking. So if you take your medicines with, well, you shouldn't be drinking pop, but if you take your medicines with a little bite of food or a little shake, that also stimulates the stomach. So really, when you're fasting, you can take anything you want during the window. Outside the window, the only thing you can have is water. And medication sometimes will stimulate the same insulin responsiveness. So if you can limit everything that's solid and or medicine and or vitamin into that 10-hour window, or that fasting window, that'd be great. So again, so the benefits are you decrease the amount of volume. You will hopefully help the sleep cycle. I think it does help the sleep cycle. I mentioned in my previous video how the acidity in the gut, that microbiome that we have of bacteria, it's very clever. And the group has you eat in the daytime, there's a certain amount of bacteria that get stimulated in the daytime. And as you fast or go to sleep at night, there's a certain amount of bacteria, different bacteria that get stimulated at night. So if you have this rhythm that occurs, then the gut works better. There's less leaky gut, less bloating, less farting, better absorption. There's also better secretion of hormone and decreased inflammation too in the gut. And if there's decreased inflammation in the gut, there's decreased inflammation in the system, less joint pain, less Alzheimer's scarring, less irritation to cholesterol plaques. It's all beneficial. I think we're taking it a little bit too far. I like the work of Justin Sonnenberg as far as the gut microbiome. Again, I think it will reinforce your sleep so you can sleep deeper. You won't be as hungry from poor night's sleep. You'll have less hunting. I told you about the melatonin insulin responsiveness relationship. And finally, even though I said that you curtail the amount of hours available for eating, the other thing that you will get is something called apoptosis. So apoptosis is when cells have been given the signal to self-destruct. Bad cells, after you get to a certain age or a certain amount of decades, they'll not reproduce because the older a cell is, the higher the chances for changing into a cancerous cell, not reproducing properly. And I still have this video on eating for cancer that I have to do. Great information, keep an eye out for it. But sometimes that's called apoptosis, when the cell signals, I have to die, the other cells take over, and this bad cell gets kicked out and put back into circulation. Well, apoptosis is triggered when you have good day-night cycles. Also, apoptosis is improved when you put fasting into play. So, and apoptosis is also triggered when you eat healthy foods, antioxidants. So, and apoptosis is essentially what the first step you do to beat cancer. So I mentioned a couple things about weight loss, about controlling inflammation to the coronary arteries and the brain. The top 3 killers of Americans would be in their 70s, would be heart attack is number 1, inflammation of the heart. Cancer is number 2, and I just mentioned cancer and apoptosis. And then cardiovascular or strokes is number 3. So in places of the world where Dan Buettner studied the blue zones, they still die of the same 3 things, but they die at like 100 versus Americans dying at like 60 to 70. And it's the same disease. So again, there must be doing something proper, and usually it's being mindful with their eating time, having exercise in their lifestyle, even at 100 years of age, having family togetherness, eating mostly a whole food plant-based diet. So all these things are important. And I think that if we can decrease the possibility of cancer with triggering apoptosis, then why not? If it only takes just manipulating your time, great, as far as your eating time. If it only takes manipulating some of the food products that you're using, then great too. So why not? Versus going straight to radiation chemotherapy, cutting out big tumors, getting stents done, having a rotor-rooter of the neck, being on disability because you had a stroke. All these things are very life-threatening. They're life-altering too. And nowadays, you don't nearly die of those things. You live because we're so close to emergency rooms around here, and procedures in the emergency room are fast. You'll live, but you'll be disabled. And then your kids that you're trying to get a healthy lifestyle and give a break to in this society, they'll have to take care of you, which isn't fair. So Hopefully this helps, Rico, as far as fasting and sleep and choices of food, maybe medications. But that was a good question. And I know there's several different topics all in one. But again, Occam's razor says we choose the easiest thing. If you're not good with measurements, just try this for a short time. So if you have any comments on what you do as far as fasting, because there's different types of fasts, I'll put the link down below. But comment down below. Otherwise, we will see you in the next clinic.